Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, with over 60% of the vote counted, Angola's ruling MPLA party takes the lead in the general election tally. The opposition UNITA party isn't so sure, though. Also, the South African model who accuses Zimbabwe's First Lady of beating her up files court papers challenging the government's decision to grant Grace Mugabe diplomatic immunity. And the sour undertones of the market for Madagascar's vanilla. As prices skyrocket, the scramble to supply the world's second most expensive spice costs farmers in one of the poorest countries in the world dearly. But first, supporters of Angola's ruling party say that they're all but certain of poll victory. Definitive results from Wednesday's general election still aren't out, but with over 64% of the ballots counted, the MPLA held a commanding lead over the main opposition, UNITA. Should the MPLA win, former Defence Minister Joao Lourenco will be the country's first new president in 38 years. Liane de Bosson-Pierre brings us more from Luanda.
It's been a long day of waiting for the Angolan electorate as they await the results of the elections. Preliminary results coming in this evening. The CNE has put the MPLA, the People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola, at 64% of the vote, UNITA at 24%, followed in third position by Kazase at around 8%. Of course, these are only provisional results, as only 5 million votes have been counted so far, but the Electoral Commission went through all 18 provinces, and UNITA is coming in second in most of those, and the MPLA in the lead in all of them. Of course, it remains to be seen what happens in Luanda, with the MPLA only at around 50% of the vote, followed fairly closely by UNITA at 34%. So things could change quite dramatically in the capital, as only a third of the votes have been tallied here.
Liane de Bosson-Pierre there for us. Now, the South African model who accuses Zimbabwe's First Lady of assault has launched a court challenge to Pretoria's decision to grant Grace Mugabe immunity. Gabriella Engels filed the papers on Thursday, 5 days after Mugabe returned home from South Africa, where the government's use of its discretion to allow her to leave has been widely criticised. Engels says that the wife of Zimbabwe's president violently beat her with an electrical extension cord in a hotel in Johannesburg. Aisha Ishmael tells us more. Aisha, what can this legal challenge by Engels to the granting of diplomatic immunity for Mugabe achieve? Mugabe's already back in Zimbabwe.
Well, we know that the organization representing Ms. Engels is AfriForum, a civil rights organization. And AfriForum is arguing in their papers that South Africa's Minister of International Relations did not have the power to grant diplomatic immunity to Grace Mugabe. They're saying that the relevant act does not make provision for Grace Mugabe to be granted diplomatic immunity, specifically because she's not a head of state, and this cannot be extended to spouses. Having said that, Grace Mugabe has already left the country, but AfriForum says that they will try everything within their power to get Grace Mugabe to be held accountable for this assault that took place in South Africa. They also say that if they succeed in getting the minister's decision overturned, and if the South Africa's national prosecuting authorities fail to follow up on this, they as an organization will bring a private prosecution against Grace Mugabe, and this includes a civil claim. Now remember that Grace Mugabe does have interests in South Africa. She owns property in South Africa.
Beyond her the property that she might own and the impact it might have in South Africa, what could this whole scandal mean for Grace Mugabe in Zimbabwe, bearing in mind that she actually has some pretty ambitious political plans?
Well, it's no secret that Grace Mugabe has aspirations of becoming Zimbabwe's next president, but this latest assault incident might just throw a spanner in the works. We've already seen protests taking place in South Africa and in Zimbabwe against Grace Mugabe following this incident, and Zimbabwean activists have also written to South Africa apologizing to South Africans for the bad behavior of their First Lady. And this is also not the first incident or case where Grace Mugabe has been accused of assaulting somebody.
Thanks very much. Aisha Ishmael there for us in Cape Town. Now, Eritrea, Guinea and Sierra Leone are in line to be hit by visa restrictions by the US. The move is meant to put pressure on countries who've refused to take back citizens deported from the United States. Officials are likely to target government officials and their families if and when the sanctions are introduced. The US is hoping to deport foreign nationals who've finished serving jail terms. Now, Kenya's president laid into new MPs for pushing back against salary reductions. Uhuru Kenyatta is waiting on the Supreme Court to rule on a challenge to his victory in the August 8th presidential election. But he has said that should he be cleared for another term, he will not be backing calls from members of parliament to reverse their wage cuts. The government spends about half its budget on salaries. Last month, the Remuneration Commission said that it would reduce pay for top officials, including the president, to save around 70 million euros a year. MPs in Kenya could earn up to around 8,500 euros a month. The Kenyan minimum wage is about $85 a month. Hundreds of people have been killed in unrest in Central African Republic this year alone. A sectarian conflict between Christian militia and mainly Muslim rebels continue. Civilians suffer. A look now at the town of Bangassou, which is now controlled by loosely organised armed groups. Most of the populations fled over to the Congolese side of the river. Marios Sophos has the story.
A ghost town, but once a vibrant diamond mining centre, Bangassou's houses and buildings now lie in ruins as a result of ongoing violence between the anti-Balaka and Seleka militia groups. Around 200 Muslims have taken shelter from the fighting on the grounds of a cathedral in the Central African town.
It happened on Saturday. We'd sought refuge in the mosque. People fought and fired shots. My brother was hit by a bullet to his heart and a second to his chest.
The majority of Bangassou's inhabitants have fled across the border with the Democratic Republic of Congo into the village of Undu, which now hosts over 16,000 displaced people. Previously, the town had not been seriously affected by the conflict, which broke out in the Central African Republic after President Francois Bozizé was ousted by Muslim rebels in 2013. The UN mission MINUSCA has posted 13,000 peacekeepers on the ground in Central Africa. Heavy fighting in Bangassou has left only Médecins Sans Frontières and the Catholic Church to assist those affected.
Here you have members of the Muslim community and some members of the Christian community who sought refuge at Catholic sites. Members of the Muslim community, for example, have not been allowed to go out and get medical help at the hospital or in clinics on the town's outskirts.
Against a backdrop of extreme poverty in Central Africa, the conflict has left thousands dead, with a fifth of the country's population having also fled their homes.
Well, rampant speculation and a collapse in production following a cyclone has seen the price of vanilla, which is Madagascar's largest export, surge recently. The sudden cash bonanzas threaten to fuel crime and slash quality.
Patrick looks after his vanilla pods as he would precious stones. He keeps them hidden before selling them at a higher price. Business is booming, and soaring prices have allowed him to build this house. But they have also brought trouble. The vanilla industry in Madagascar is now rife with scams, theft and even deaths.
The traders have no scruples. I'm looking to quit this work because it's too hard. Everyone is dishonest. Whether they're 20, 40, 60 years old, everyone lies.
Madagascar produces 80% of the world's vanilla, but demand is greater than supply, leading its value to triple in 3 years to $600 per kilo. The price explosion has led to increased thefts from vanilla plantations.
We risk death watching over our plantations at night. That's why it's so hard to work in vanilla now.
Madagascar's bourbon vanilla is a product of generations of expertise and has been considered the best in the world. But fear of theft is forcing some growers to pick their pods too early, resulting in a drop in quality and declining standards.
Certainly, there are some who are in the industry solely for opportunism. Us, we live on vanilla. It's getting harder and harder to sell it because some people have been cheated. They've bought vanilla that was mouldy or rotten.
Madagascar's vanilla industry was worth $650 million last year, 5% of the country's total GDP. But little wealth from these scented black seeds is invested back into the local economy. Most homes in the region have no electricity, and just a fifth have access to drinking water.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks very much for joining us. Do so again. Take care.